Welcome back. Yesterday I made a post about Ibogaine um, and some hype that it's received, and said that I would circle back today and we would start a series talking about the various different plants and strengths and weaknesses. So today is a deeper dive into Ibogaine. And right up front, let me say, I am not an expert. This is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. Next, I want to be really clear. I am not anti-Ibogaine. I've already received a lot of comments saying, "Hey, Ibogaine saved my life." I never said that that it didn't have practical application. What I what I said yesterday and I'm saying today, is that there is some real significant dangers in hyping any of them. Um, and I'm going to repeat this down, as we go along. But what's really important is that we approach this from a place of like wisdom, research, sacredness, clarity, and finding the right plant for the right problem, finding the right solution for the right problem. There is no one size fits all, especially in plant medicine. And that's my concern about the hype when people start saying Ibogaine is the gold standard, Ibogaine is the best. Not necessarily. We're going to get into that a little bit deeper. So, a couple key points with psychedelics in general. All of them have mental health efficacy, period. Another name for plant medicine is entheogens, meaning sacred plants. And they have been used for mental health and connection to God for millennia. Secondly, they all work on addiction. Absolutely every single one of them. Every single one of them, if done at the right doses, or even microdosed, will offer you neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, which is what allows you to get out of the addiction cycle. It's like a fish swimming upstream at the base of the Hoover Dam. Like, like that's a lot of momentum to try to overcome. And what psychedelics do is they lift you out of that swimming upstream model and allow you time to regroup and gather and new neural pathways. And by and large, psychedelics are extremely safe. If done with the proper mitigating factors, almost all of them are very, very safe. Okay, not completely safe. There are some exceptions, which ironically we're going to talk about today. So let's go into a deeper dive with ibogaine. Let's go. What is the difference? Some people are saying iboga, and some people are saying ibogaine. Well, the plant iboga comes from West Africa, concentrated in Gabon in West Africa. Get the connection? Gabon, iboga. It is the national plant of Gabon. And the active molecule that does the work in the psychedelic context that comes from iboga, the plant, is ibogaine. Okay. And it has become so popular now that it is now a scarce resource in Gabon. In fact, a lot of the local indigenous people were giving up their traditional medicines just for the market of it. Thankfully, there's a lot of work around that to help prevent that. It's beginning to be grown and cultivated outside of West Africa, which has some downfall too, right? Like those resources and that wealth should be transferred to the people, to their indigenous plant. So there's some downfalls there. Secondly, it is also available synthetically, which is another good option, so that we don't deplete that resource, so that we don't continue to, I guess, mistreat the indigenous people whose traditional medicine it belongs to. So there's some complication around that. The second thing is that, and I already talked to this a little bit about this idea that we're shoehorning, sort of a shoehorn effect, putting a one size fits all hype and intention without the sacredness, and sort of chasing the dragon. If we look at all psychedelics through that lens of intention, let's start with why. What is it specifically that we're trying to address? What is it specifically a person is trying to heal? That's the real question. That's where we have to begin. If we start with what am I trying to heal? What is the outcome that I'm seeking? What is my sacred intention? Then that can guide the conversation, the research, and the discussion around which psychedelic is best for what. Um, there is no scale. There is no 1 to 10. Psilocybin's a 4, and ayahuasca's an 8, and ibogaine is a 10. That's not the case. Again, using the tool metaphor, there's a hammer, there's a saw, there's a screwdriver, there's a chisel, whatever. They all have a specific, unique capability. So with that in mind, let's dive into, the differences, the strengths, the weaknesses, and the problems with Ibogaine. Okay, so the first main difference is the default mode network. Scientists used to believe that you went on these hallucinations, you went on these trips, and they were wild and wacky, and who knows where they came from. It was the drug that made them happen. That's not at all true. All psychedelics quiet the default mode network. What is the default mode network, you ask? The default mode network is that constant running thought process in your brain. You know how you can never turn off your brain? You're sitting there trying to meditate and you're thinking about like, oh, I got to remember to pick up milk, and oh, I forgot to call, Jim about this work thing. Like, that's the default mode network. Your brain never shuts off. When you take a psychedelic, it allows the default mode network to quiet down, to go into the background, so that the rest of the brain that generally doesn't get time to speak is allowed time to speak to you. Okay, so all of them do that for us. But the difference with Ibogaine versus most others is that Ibogaine is more of a life review. Like, you will literally watch your whole life in review for most of the participants, whereas most of the other psychedelics allow a lot of other types of, there's still some life review, there still can be some key events, but there's a lot more of, I guess, what I would call meaningful insight about things more extrinsic versus intrinsic. One of the other key differences is that it's a dissociative. There's not a lot of dissociatives. And when I say dissociatives, I mean like you are completely out and unaware. Now, there is a gray scale about how far you disassociate. Some people can be less disassociated than others, but there is the potentiality for complete disassociation, meaning you are completely out, you're not aware of your surroundings, you're not aware of your body, and you are just in the journey, okay? Psilocybin, ayahuasca, all these they're more like a dreamlike state, right? Like, you can, imagine dreaming, you could be woken up from that dream, go to your journal, write down what you just dreamt about, close it, go back to bed. That's kind of the same as a psychedelic experience. You can be in the journey, wake up, write down in your journal something significant, close it, and go back into the journey. Okay, with a dissociative, there is none of that. Okay, you are out. In fact, the most reputable clinics, and the clinic that I'm most familiar with, they hook you up to machines. They have a cardiologist and a nurse and a crash kit, and you are out. So that's one of the main differences. And that dissociation with Ibogaine can last I guess the common answer is about 18 hours, not 15 minutes. So it's pretty significant. Its strengths. Again, all psychedelics work on your serotonin and your dopamine receptors, but Ibogaine's really unique capacity, and this is the point. This is what I'm saying, and this is why we shouldn't hype it, and why we shouldn't, consider it the gold standard, is because all psychedelics work on serotonin and dopamine receptors, but Ibogaine's unique capacity is more on the dopamine receptors. Now, if you're not remembering the difference between dopamine and serotonin receptors from 10th grade, biology, let me give you a quick overview. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical, and receptors that metabolize that. So when we are receiving pleasure, so think of sex. Think of anything that's addictive, gambling, alcohol, any of those, anything. And this is also goes to the point that anything can become addictive, right? Like if it soothes you in a situation and you do it enough times, you'll release dopamine and you will become addicted to whatever substance or activity you're doing, just because of the dopamine. So dopamine is associated with pleasure and leads to addiction. Serotonin, on the other hand, is the I feel safe, I feel peace, I feel joy. It's your happy chemical. Pleasure, happy. Okay? So all psychedelics work on both, but Ibogaine's specifically targets more heavily the dopamine, the glutamate, and the opioid systems. It resets them, which leads to, translation, it is particularly suited for opioid and fentanyl and meth addictions, like those real hardcore. Now, again, like I acknowledge that if most of us that have, PTSD, moral injury, all of these like mental illness, we've probably been coping with those types of things that have led to addiction. And so there is a need to consider Ibogaine in the discussion with PTSD. But more specifically, and again, I'm stressing this, more specifically, Ibogaine is particularly well suited for addiction, especially opioid addiction. So then we bring into the conversation Americans for Ibogaine. It's a nonprofit. It's being led by former Governor Rick Perry of Texas and a man by the name of Brian Hubbard. I'm not sure of his credentials. I think it might be Dr. Brian Hubbard. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on Sean Ryan. And if I'm not mistaken, he's from Kentucky. And that's perfect. That's the perfect application. That's ground zero for opioid addiction. Thank you, Sackler family, who gave us the coal miners. We've all seen the movies. We've all watched it, right? Like that was the problem, is that they got these poor rural communities so addicted to opioids and they're in crisis, okay? So yes, addiction leads to PTSD and PTSD can lead to addiction. So there is overlap. But when we're talking about more specifically real heavy, real deep opioid addiction, not only do we need to treat the dopamine and the serotonin receptors in our brains, but we also really need to reset them. And this is Ibogaine's real speciality, is it resets those dopamine receptors and the opioid receptors in a way that the others cannot, which is why it should be saved for real hardcore addicts. Okay, its weaknesses. Again, like I said, very few psychedelics are dissociative. None that last as long as this one, 18 hours. Translation, you have to have a cardiologist in the room and proper precautions are not taken. And if anybody out there is thinking about going to West Africa to try this, like just know, like the way that they serve this is they will dig a grave and bury you in it and leave you in that grave. I think married up to your neck is some of the rumors and things I've seen. Actual deaths have occurred. Like take for instance, like there's a famous ayahuasca story about someone who died because of ayahuasca, but it wasn't really the ayahuasca that killed this gentleman. What happened was it was a lack of supervision, and he wasn't enjoying the journey, so he wanted to speed it up by getting it out of his body. So he drank 2 or 3 gallons of water, I think is the estimate, to flush the ayahuasca out. But instead he ended up flushing all of his electrolytes, and his system crashed. It's internal drowning essentially. Okay, so it wasn't the ayahuasca killing him. Same with this. If you have certain chemicals, if your blood work, if your cardiovascular systems aren't up to this, you will crash. And so this one will actually kill you. This is why there are, and to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but Google search deep, and multiple times I've searched for this as recently as 10 minutes ago. There are no Ibogaine clinics in the U.S. Most of them are in Mexico. The one that I'm most familiar with, which I know the man that runs it. I consider him a colleague. I refer people to him, and it's the one that's featured in the documentary. And I think they're doing tremendous work and they're doing it right. I just my concern here is let's get into the next problem, which leads us to the problem. Like I said, there's very, very few resources, okay? Like it's being tapped out in Gabon in West Africa. We need to learn how to harvest it properly. We need to learn how to make reparations to the people of Gabon. We need to learn how to properly create a synthetic. We need to work through the supply chain of all that. Because again, and there's also so few clinics out there doing it. And then when we get that misplaced hype of best and gold standard, now we have a classic supply demand problem, okay? Where the demand is super, super high and the supply is super, super low. What does that translate to? Especially if you're a veteran out there who has bought into the hype and you think that this is your only solution, you end up signing up with these nonprofits to go and do Ibogaine, to go and do Ibogaine in Mexico. And I have firsthand knowledge of this, that the wait times are in excess of 18 months sometimes. Like if you are on the verge of suicide and wrestling with suicidality and depression and PTSD and, alcoholism, 18 months is a long damn time to wait. Like a seriously long time to wait. So, and the cost is in excess of $4,000, probably higher because I haven't checked the numbers recently in years. But the last time I checked, it was $4,000. And so if that's the case, like I know that we can put we could put 5 people into ceremony next month for that. If they're not serious opioid and fentanyl addicts, if they're just wrestling with alcoholism, depression, PTSD, suicidal ideation, ayahuasca can really address all of, if not most of, if not all of that. So that, to me, it seems like the more hype that we give Ibogaine for general PTSD, general depression, less severe addiction, we compound the problem of the supply and the demand. It's not just legality about how we do legal psychedelics in this country. It's about having clinics and doctors and cardiologists and nurses and crash kits and the cost of doing it versus a much lower cost, much more feasible, much safer, and much more accessible medicine such as ayahuasca, acacia, psilocybin, which we're going to discuss soon. Okay, so bottom line, start with the why. Why are we having this conversation? Why are you doing the research? What is the problem you want to solve? And then consider the vast array of plants and fungi and animal, if we talk about bufo, which I will get to, would work best for that specific problem. What tool? Find the right tool for the right problem, okay? Please don't just take the shotgun approach that it's the one and best and only solution out there. And don't chase the dragon, people. Don't chase the dragon. I worry so much about the influencers that hype some of these and they create an expectation so that when the average guy goes and does medicine, they're like, well, geez, like that was nothing like what Joe Rogan explained. That's not what I expected. So there's that problem too. But, start with a real sacred intention. Why are you doing this? What is the purpose? And once we've narrowed that down, which of these plants, fungi, or animals would be best for it? Oh, by the way, if you want to read more about it, From Green Beret to Shamanism, One Man's Journey to Heal, I have a whole section on psychedelics, plant medicine, and go into a deeper dive with that. Every single book, 100% of the proceeds go to funding veteran ceremony. Okay, so offsetting even the $800 versus the $4,000. This is a way to actually save lives. It's all tax deductible. And by the way, if you buy the book, you're directly helping save veteran lives. All right, folks. Like, comment, share, follow. Awake Green Beret. I appreciate your time. I know this was a long one.